There's a quiet kind of suffering that rarely makes the news. It's not the bloodied aftermath of war or the shrill echo of collapsing economies. It's the man sitting in traffic at 7:43 a.m., mentally rehearsing how he might explain to his child why he can't afford a birthday gift this year. It's the woman in a hospital bed, bones eroded by chemotherapy, whispering apologies to her mother between waves of pain. It's the boy who never got to be a boy, growing up in a home where fists spoke louder than words. These aren't rare exceptions. These are threads in the fabric of human life. And yet society insists life is a gift, a sacred flame passed from parent to child, a divine right to be cherished. But what if that belief is not only mistaken, but cruel? What if bringing someone into existence, no matter how good their life might seem, is an irreversible harm? Philosopher David Benatar doesn't flinch from this question. In his book, Better Never to Have Been, he presents an unsettling argument: that existence is fundamentally a loss, not a gain. Not because life is always bad, but because the absence of suffering is always good, even if no one is around to enjoy it. And the absence of pleasure? It's not bad if there's no one to miss it. This isn't nihilism. It's not bitterness. It's a surgical dissection of the human condition, one that refuses to let optimism drown out logic. And as disturbing as it may be, Benatar's reasoning forces us to reconsider everything we take for granted about birth, meaning, and the ethics of procreation. In a world where 800,000 people die by suicide every year, where millions are trafficked, abused, neglected, and silenced, can we truly claim that to be born is always a blessing? This video is not an invitation to despair. It's an invitation to think ruthlessly, fearlessly, and maybe for the first time, honestly, about whether existence is the miracle we pretend it is. Some truths don't scream, they whisper. And in that whisper lies a discomfort so profound, most spend their lives avoiding it. One of those truths is this: no matter how good life gets, the worst parts of it still have the final word. Ask yourself this: if a child is never born, who suffers? Who loses? There's no regret, no pain, no grief in non-existence. But if a child is born and suffers, even briefly, then that pain is real, undeniable, and irreversible. That, in its core, is David Benatar's asymmetry argument. And it's not a thought experiment, it's a lens, one that exposes the hidden arrogance of procreation. In Better Never to Have Been, Benatar outlines this with surgical logic. The presence of pain is bad. The presence of pleasure is good. The absence of pain is good, even if there's no one to benefit from that good. But the absence of pleasure is not bad, unless someone exists to miss it. This is the asymmetry. It's not emotional, it's not theological, it's mathematical. And disturbingly, it holds up under scrutiny. For instance, consider this. We don't grieve over the children we never conceived. We don't lament the joy they'll never feel. But we do deeply regret when a child suffers, even if it was only for a moment. The moral imbalance is glaring. Birth is a gamble, and pain is always part of the stakes. Benatar's claim, then, is not that all lives are miserable. It's that no risk of suffering is justifiable when the alternative, non-existence, is free of harm, free of deprivation, free of any cost whatsoever. This idea isn't merely theoretical. Think of Tay-Sachs disease, a neurodegenerative condition that slowly destroys a child's brain and nervous system, leading to death by age 4. The parents, in most cases, had no idea. The child never asked. And once the suffering begins, there's no undoing the decision. Can the potential of joy ever truly outweigh that level of suffering? Our culture clings to narratives that glorify resilience. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But in Benatar's framework, this is not wisdom. It's rationalization. Survival is not proof that something was worth enduring. It's merely evidence that the damage wasn't yet fatal. This may feel unsettling because we are conditioned to view life as inherently good. But that conditioning is part of the problem. The optimists, Benatar writes, err in the opposite direction from the pessimists. They think life is much better than it really is. His point is not that joy doesn't exist, but that its presence doesn't cancel the horror of suffering. And worse, it's not needed at all when someone simply never exists. There is something cold, perhaps even monstrous, about this logic. And yet, it is not born from cruelty. It's born from compassion radicalized by reason. It asks, why gamble with a life when no life is a safe haven? Why risk agony for someone who didn't ask to play? We rarely see our own lives through this lens. But when applied to others, especially those whose suffering is deep, daily, and undeserved, the question becomes impossible to ignore. Is life always worth the price of admission? Or have we mistaken momentum for morality? Consent is sacred. It governs our ethics, our laws, our bodies. We do not touch without permission. We do not operate, inject, sedate, or imprison without it, at least not ethically. And yet, the single most consequential decision ever made for any human being, the decision to create them, is made without their input, their knowledge, their choice. Birth is the only life-altering act we celebrate precisely because no one involved can refuse it. This isn't a clever twist. It's the spine of Benatar's ethics. The interests of potential people do not outweigh the risks imposed upon them by being brought into existence. He doesn't argue that life is always miserable. He argues that the imposition of life, no matter the outcome, bypasses the very autonomy we pretend to value above all else. Think of it this way. If a surgeon performed an irreversible experimental operation on a person without consent, but promised it might result in great happiness, we would call that monstrous. Yet procreation is treated as a loving gift, even though it carries far greater risks and far less certainty. In truth, most people are born not from ethical deliberation, but from accidents, unmet desires, or expectations imposed by culture, religion, or biology. Rarely is a child brought into the world as a result of rigorous moral calculus. And why would they be? The idea that consent should matter before someone exists feels absurd to most, but only because we've never bothered to confront the implications. There's no way to ask a non-existent person if they want to live. But that doesn't make the act morally neutral. It makes it uniquely coercive. In every other ethical domain, lack of consent is treated with suspicion or outright condemnation. Birth, curiously, is the exception. Now consider the weight of what is being decided. A lifetime. Not just pleasure and beauty, but suffering, humiliation, illness, loss, aging, and death. It is the full spectrum, unasked for and unavoidable. No contract, no opt-out clause, only consequences. Benatar is ruthless in this observation. Because we cannot obtain the consent of those we would create, and because the harms of life can be so severe, it is better never to bring anyone into existence. In his view, to create someone is to force them into a game where the stakes are infinite, but the player never agreed to play. This isn't about parental love or intention. It's about the structure of the act itself. Love doesn't negate harm. Intention doesn't erase consequence. A parent may adore their child, but if that child lives a life of relentless torment, love becomes irrelevant in the moral equation. Even the best lives contain trauma. Even the happiest people die. The clock begins ticking the moment one is born. And the most haunting part? The one who bears the costs never signed the contract. It's easy to dismiss this argument as cold or anti-human, but it may be the most compassionate position possible. to refuse to play God with someone else's pain, to admit that we do not have the right to decide what degree of suffering is worth it for another person. That humility, rare and radical, lies at the core of antinatalism, not hatred of life, but reverence for the moral limits of our power. There is a strange form of worship in our species, a quiet, compulsive veneration of pain. We lace it into language, bake it into tradition, and call it character when it breaks us but doesn't kill us. We tell ourselves that suffering builds resilience, that struggle teaches meaning, that scars are proof of depth. We decorate anguish with metaphors and tuck tragedy inside growth narratives. It's one of the most insidious forms of denial we've ever invented. But why do we do it? Because the alternative is intolerable. That much of human suffering is arbitrary, pointless, and cruel. That millions suffer not because they're meant to grow, but because they were born into conditions no one should ever endure. To admit that is to admit that pain isn't part of a plan. It's part of a brutal statistical reality. And that is a truth many are unwilling to face. Benatar cuts through this with the precision of a surgeon. There is no cosmic point to the struggle, no grand design. The suffering is not redeemed simply because it ends or because some lesson is extracted from it. In other words, dressing up pain as a teacher doesn't change its nature. It only changes our tolerance for imposing it on others, especially those we create. Take the ubiquitous phrase, "Everything happens for a reason." It is offered like a balm, often in the aftermath of devastating events, miscarriages, suicides, accidents, diagnoses. But it is not truth. It is anesthetic. It allows us to continue believing that life, even at its most grotesque, has an invisible logic. And yet most suffering has no higher function. There is no lesson in watching a toddler waste away in a famine zone. No noble purpose in a woman raped by soldiers during wartime. No transcendent awakening in the shriek of a dying animal, or the panic of a man buried alive by earthquake rubble. These are not plot points. They are realities. And they happen daily. Still, cultures across the world reinforce this myth of meaningful suffering. Religious traditions frame it as purification. Self-help doctrines turn it into transformation. Even cinema and literature glorify the arc of pain into wisdom, as though trauma must justify itself through revelation. But what if there's no revelation? What if the pain just is, and that's the end of it? Benatar's framework refuses to romanticize. He doesn't deny that people can endure and adapt. But he argues, crucially, that the need to endure wouldn't exist if the harm had never been introduced. We do not praise those who avoid being shot, he notes. Why then do we praise those who recover from bullet wounds? The absurdity lies in framing survival as virtue, when it's merely necessity. One might argue, of course, that beauty can still emerge from pain. And yes, some people write novels, compose music, or find empathy in the aftermath of suffering. But this is not an argument for suffering. It is evidence that humans are forced to extract meaning from agony because the alternative, admitting its waste, is emotionally unbearable. This cultural lie is one of the final strongholds against anti-natalist thought. Because if suffering can be redeemed, then birth might still be defensible. But when pain is revealed as non-redemptive, the illusion crumbles, and with it, our moral justification for creating more lives condemned to experience it. Every birth is a spin of a wheel no one controls, a silent wager placed on someone else's behalf. Eyes closed, dice thrown, and whatever comes, joy or agony, they're the ones who have to live it, not the parent, not the doctor, not God, the child. No matter how much love is promised, how carefully a nursery is decorated, how advanced the technology, procreation is, at its core, a gamble. And it's not just a gamble with odds. It's a gamble with another person's entire existence. That, David Benatar argues, is a form of moral recklessness society has normalized through sentimentality and denial. When you create life, you are not offering someone a gift. You are imposing upon them the full spectrum of human vulnerability, disease, decay, humiliation, loss. You're betting they'll find it all worth it, even if they never had a say in whether to play. Statistically, this is chilling. Over 6,000 genetic disorders can be inherited, many of them catastrophic. Cystic fibrosis, Huntington's, ALS, Tay-Sachs. Even without a family history, mutations can occur at conception. Beyond genetics, there's geography, economics, environment. A child born into extreme poverty, into a region at war, into systemic oppression. None of it is chosen. All of it is suffered. Benatar writes, "The risks of serious harm are so high that it is wrong to impose them on another person without their consent, even if the probability is relatively low." The point is not that life will definitely be bad. It's that if it turns out to be horrific, there is no recourse, no compensation, no undoing the damage. Contrast this with how we approach risk in every other domain. We hesitate to expose people to even mild danger without robust consent and safety nets. We test drugs for years before human trials. We regulate food, vehicles, buildings, all to avoid unnecessary harm. But birth? That risk is unregulated, unexamined, and glorified. There's an unsettling paradox here. Society demands caution in almost every ethical decision, except the one that creates a new sentient being. There, we turn off the alarms. There we say love is enough, hope is enough, biology is enough. But hope doesn't cure leukemia. Love doesn't reverse paralysis. Biology doesn't promise justice. And for those born into unbearable circumstances, children trafficked for sex, infants addicted to narcotics in utero, teenagers mutilated by war, the abstract optimism of their creators is an insult. Even the good outcomes are temporary. Everyone dies. Everyone declines. The best-case scenario still ends in loss. Benatar's logic is not fueled by misanthropy. It's rooted in the refusal to pretend. Most people, he writes, are not miserable, but all are harmed. Some might counter, but don't we also inherit joy, connection, music, art, sunsets, intimacy? Yes, but the value of these things only matters to someone already forced into the condition of needing them. The absence of pleasure does not harm a non-person, but the presence of pain always harms the one who feels it. And so, birth becomes an ethical paradox, a self-justifying harm. We create beings, then comfort ourselves when they suffer, saying that's life. But life was never neutral. It was the original imposition. When parents say, "We just wanted a baby," what they often mean is, "We accepted the risk on their behalf." But no matter how pure the desire, the child is the one who must live with the consequences of a decision they could never escape. Some realizations don't scream. They settle in the gut, dense, slow, irreversible. One of them is this: you are here without ever asking to be. That being here is a consequence of someone else's hope, accident, or ideology, and yet you carry the full weight of its result. If birth is, as David Benatar argues, a harm, then what are we supposed to do with that knowledge? We're already inside the machine. The door is sealed. The lights are on. Existence for those already thrown into it is not a choice. It's a sentence. Benatar is not naive about this. He doesn't promote suicide, nor does he fantasize about human extinction through violence or force. His ethics, however radical they seem, are deeply rooted in non-harm. While it is good not to create new lives, we must still be compassionate toward those who already exist. That means we do not worsen the error with cruelty. We do not compound harm with despair. Still, Acknowledging that birth might have been a mistake carries an existential weight that few philosophies are brave enough to bear. It requires living in spite of the harm, not in denial of it. That takes a kind of internal integrity that culture rarely prepares us for. This is not a call to give up. It's a call to stop pretending, to stop cloaking suffering in moral justifications or spiritual cliches, to live clearly, lucidly, aware of the machinery, the randomness, the gamble that produced us, and from there perhaps to live differently. Some choose antinatalism not as rejection of life, but as an act of mercy. They refuse to create new beings, not out of hatred, but because they understand too well what existence demands. Others redirect their energies into care, adoption, healing, advocacy, attempting at the very least to tend to the garden rather than plant more seeds in infertile soil. And many simply carry on. They wake up, work, love, laugh, rage, grieve, not because life is beautiful, but because life is, and they are in it. Benatar doesn't condemn this. What he challenges is the mythology, the default assumption that existence is good, that more of it must be better, that reproduction is inherently meaningful. What if, instead of measuring our lives by fulfillment, we measured them by harm reduction, by how little suffering we pass on, by how many chains we break rather than bind? There's a quiet heroism in refusing to create what you cannot protect. There's a strange dignity in recognizing that not all things we can do are things we should do. And in a world addicted to expansion, that restraint is nothing short of radical. No one chooses to be born. But those already here still choose what kind of presence they will be. That perhaps is the only real freedom we get.